Kid Rock and GM in a flap over the Confederate flag. The debate over the U.S. deal with Iran. A famous graffiti artist, now accused felon in Detroit. And the people who got good news this week. Stay put. My Week starts right now.
Recently, Michigan's economy has begun to turn around. Michigan's gained over 250,000 new jobs. We've paid off $20 billion in long-term debt. And our population is increasing for the first time in a decade. But to make Michigan a top 10 state, there's still plenty of work to be done. Step up and help put Michigan on top. Learn what you can do at MichiganTurnaroundPlan.com.
Funding is also provided by Delta.
Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us for My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. It has been a big week in the spotlight for General Motors. First, the automaker kicked off contract talks with the UAW, and that promises to be a tough road. But what most of the country is talking about when it comes to GM is the heat the company is taking over Kid Rock and the Confederate flag. Chevy sponsors the rocker summer tour, and now a civil rights group wants GM to dump the rocker because of his past use of the Confederate flag. Coming up tonight, GM is meeting with the group this week. Will the issue have any impact on General Motors and sales? We'll look at both sides of the story here. Also, President Obama defending his landmark nuclear agreement with Iran. We'll discuss the reaction from Congress, Michigan's delegation, and the 2016 presidential candidates. Plus, a famous graffiti artist's work lands him in a Detroit court on a felony charge. We'll talk about the city's crackdown on illegal art. And it was a pretty good week for a few people. See who makes our list. That's what's coming up for you on My Week tonight. But we do begin with Kid Rock. And as of tonight, GM says it's sticking with the singer's tour. However, representatives from GM and Chevrolet are meeting this week with the local chapter of the National Action Network to listen to their concerns. And so far, Kid Rock hasn't really officially commented on this issue. His spokesperson did speak to the Free Press. But during the recent flag protests in South Carolina, he told critics to kiss his... well, you can fill in the blank there. Just 4 years ago, Kid Rock received an award from the Detroit NAACP, though. He said he has never flown the Confederate flag with any hate in his heart. And that is where we begin our discussion tonight with our My Week contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Nolan, let me start with you. What did you think when you first started hearing this brewing up the last 5 days? Well,
I thought what I always think when the Reverend Charles Williams and that group start squawking about something, that it's either a shakedown or they're looking for attention. I think in this case it's both. Kid Rock told the Free Press, or his people told the Free Press, I haven't flown that flag in 5 years and I'm not going to. But what he's not going to do is go out there and make some kind of statement coerced by Charles Williams to make it look like that group pushed him into doing this. He doesn't use the flag. He said he's not going to. It's a non-issue. It's non-issue for GM.
I think it was interesting that his spokesperson did just come out in the last 24 hours to the Free Press and said that it was that award that he got from the Detroit NAACP back in 2011 that really made him step back and think, and that, you know, he did say, you know what, I haven't flown it or used it in any of my shows since then.
Well, and I think that's the point, is that he ought to come out and say himself, here's what my history with that flag is. And I think we're at this sort of moment right now in this country where we are having more frank conversations about things that have been done, transgressions that have been indulged, and I think it's okay. In fact, I think it's okay for him. He might take advantage of that and say, listen, I used to do that, and here's why I stopped. Here's what I think of that now. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I don't think that's coercion or bowing to somebody's demands. It's about recognizing that this symbol is in the middle of a pretty important conversation that we're trying to have about this country and its history and its present, and he's got some accounting to do, like a lot of other people.
I wholly disagree. I think it's absurd. I think he said exactly the right thing when asked about it. You know, kiss my fanny. If he chooses to come out and he sent his spokespeople to say that very thing, I don't know what folks want. You know, anybody who has ever had any sort of of association with the Confederate flag now suddenly has to step up and throw themselves on the sword?
That's actually my next question. Do you have to, does everyone who have had any kind of affiliation with it have to now come forward, explain why they have?
I think if you're a public figure who was embracing this flag, it's not a bad idea at this point to talk about that. Why were you for it? You know, what was the embrace that you put around it, and why'd you do that? I don't think there's anything wrong with coming forward at this point and saying that.
I mean, he's explained that over and over. He said, you know, to him it was emblematic of Southern rock, which he was a big fan of, and it was during that period.
Specific group, and also a racist group.
And well. And he said, you know, it was sort of exemplary of his rebel spirit. What else do you want? You know, everybody shouldn't have to come forward and make some of this big weepy confession and go on Oprah and cry and say, oh my God, I'm sorry. I mean, he's not using the flag now. You've got this, you know, ragtag group that squawks and yells about everything, wanting a scalp, and he's not going to give him a scalp, and he shouldn't.
Okay, so General Motors is meeting with this group today, and they said, look, if they don't, you know, break affiliation with Kid Rock, then we're going to try to get a protest together, get people to say we're not going to buy GM products. How effective do you think that is going to be? Because it looks right now that GM is saying, okay, we're going to listen to your concerns, but Chevrolet's still sponsoring this summer tour.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of sells. I mean, for GM, it's about money, obviously, and there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose. It's a sponsorship. At the same time, again, I think the dismissiveness of any questioning of this, I think, is probably out of line.
There's no flag on that tour. He's not flying the flag. And you go into somebody's past and say, at one point, you, like a lot of other groups, had this flag out.
But I guess
you decided for good reasons. He explained his reasons. You're not going to do it. You know, I wouldn't be surprised at the end of this meeting, Charles Williams walks away with a check in his pocket, and that's the end of it, because that's what this is all about.
Really? You really think that that's?
I mean, it's a pretty cynical. It's a pretty cynical.
But you know yourself.
Pretty cynical
over and interpretation. That's how this ends.
It's a pretty cynical interpretation of this particular moment. I think that's not particularly helpful.
But once the guy says, "I'm not flying it," it's over.
Maybe not. I mean, the idea that you can just say, well, I used to do that and I don't do it anymore, and that's the end of it, I think is not necessarily.
Why not? Why shouldn't
it doesn't have to be the end of it, is the point. I think the opportunity is to make it a wider.
If he chooses to do that, if he doesn't want to be, if he doesn't feel evangelical about it, I don't think he has to come up.
Not a lot of black folks at that concert anyway.
And be dragged out.
Let me tell you this. Sam Riddle, who spoke for the Action Committee in the paper, said, quote, hang on. He said, quote, it's a flag that represents genocide to most of Detroit. Would you agree with that?
Well, it should represent genocide to almost anybody. I mean, I think that might be.
But it doesn't.
That might be technically the wrong word. It certainly represents insurrection on behalf of slavery. I mean, that's what it was, right? The Southern states who said we want to preserve the right to dehumanize African Americans and fought a war over it. That's what the flag symbolizes.
To you. But poll after poll of people in the South, 87% of the people in the South, white people in the South, do not see it as a racist symbol.
Well, and this is exactly why that's exactly why the discussion that they're trying to have is important, because it doesn't symbolize any heritage other than that. It doesn't.
It does to those folks.
But you can't.
It does to those folks, and now to drag them all out and say, well, you have to apologize for that. Everybody who was who at any time. Placed one on a grave or do this has to come out.
So when some Germans say that the Nazi flag represents a heritage to them, do they have a right to that interpretation? Oh, really? Why not? They are both symbols of a particular action, a particular set of beliefs, and those beliefs were, in this case, about slavery. That you can't say it was about anything else. I mean, this is part of the problem, is that there's a lot of myth making.
Of course it was.
Well, so then what else?
It hasn't been 20 years since there was a raging argument in the black community among black scholars who didn't want to assign the Civil War entirely to slavery. They wanted to make it an economic war because they didn't want to convey the impression that these white armies fought to free black slaves.
But
you know that.
But the idea of what's true and what's myth is important. and you can't just go and make up a story about what something was when it wasn't
you're
that.
You're not making up a story, Steve. It's
Sure
far more complex. Not everybody who marched off under that banner was marching
every
off
single
for
one of the
slavery.
states, every single one of the states who signed on to the Confederacy said that it was about said in their secession letters that it was about slavery. There was no ambiguity about that. That's what it was.
I think we can all agree on the fact that flying the Confederate flag now in a public place and glorifying it is no longer what this country should be about. But now the question
today. That wasn't 5 years ago.
No,
when
but
Kid
the
Rock
question
did
is,
it.
but the question is now with Kid Rock is how far back do you persecute people for flying?
Not persecuting.
You know,
let's talk about what
it's demanding.
Let's talk about who was persecuted. I mean, see, again, the language here is all tilted. There is no way that you can say that people who fly the
You think Kid Rock
hold on,
went
hold
on
on,
that stage?
hold on a second.
Hang on, finish,
There's no
and then
way you can
get to
say
jump
that
in.
people who flew the Confederate flag have been persecuted. They are embracing a symbol of racism and insurrection. And so to call them onto the carpet for that is not persecution.
That's not what it meant to them.
So if I go grab a Nazi flag and say, well, this means to me something different from what it's actually associated with, does that give me cover?
No, because it doesn't mean to anyone anything different than what it was associated. That's different than the Confederate
Why is that
flag
different?
That has been flying now 150
That's
years
absurd.
for a lot of different reasons.
No, there was one reason. There was one reason.
When the Dukes of Hazzard painted that on the top of the General Lee, it was.
I wasn't allowed to watch Dukes of Hazzard. We talked about
That's right. We did talk about that. You were not allowed to watch it.
It's far more complex.
All right, so we're gonna take a step back from this, guys, and we'll see what GM has to say in meeting with the National Action Network this week.
That Kid Rock is the most important symbol in this debate.
No.
But I do think that there's an opportunity for him, like everybody else, to take this a little more seriously and have the discussion that we're having, which is that it is a symbol of something very specific, and you can't make up another story about that.
Of course you can, and he explained why he flew it, and it was a very plausible explanation.
All right, so on to another topic that I'm sure we will have no disagreement on. Right now, we turn to the historic agreement between the United States and Iran and other world powers. Under the deal, Iran will scale back its nuclear program in exchange for lifting sanctions, while President Obama says the agreement will lead to a safer world. Some lawmakers remain skeptical, including members of Michigan's congressional delegation. Congress will have 60 days to review this agreement before voting on it. And it was interesting reading all the reaction from our delegation. It was very tepid. I mean, even on the Democrat side, saying, well, we are going to do our due diligence in reading every line of this to make sure that we make the most thoughtful decision possible. Nolan, I'm going to let you have first crack at this.
Well, I mean, President Obama went into these negotiations with several very specific outcomes he wanted to achieve. He walked away from the bargaining table last week having achieved almost none of them. And the ones he did achieve were very watered down. He started out saying we want to disarm Iran's nuclear capability. That capability is fully intact. In fact, if Iran does nothing less than comply fully with this agreement, in 13 to 15 years, it's a nuclear threshold state. So it doesn't have to break the agreement to become a nuclear power. It just has to follow it. He said we're going to have anywhere, anytime inspections. Far short of that. It's a 24-hour delay at least, and it could be many months before inspections can be carried out. There's a reason the Iranians are celebrating, the Syrians are celebrating, the Russians are celebrating. This is a very, very bad deal. And one of the worst parts hasn't been talked about much, but in the last minute, Iran threw on the table, oh, by the way, we want a lifting of the arms embargo. And we signed off on that, too. There wasn't a single concession Iran asked for that we didn't grant. We wanted this deal too bad.
All right, so do you agree with Nolan that when you hear that Iran and Russia and the Syrians are celebrating that we should be wary?
Well, I mean, I think that's part of the equation, obviously, is that they had things that they wanted. One of the things that Iran wanted, I think the most important, is legitimacy. And Iran doesn't want to be treated like some sort of third world, second class state. It wants to negotiate with the West and the U.S. and Western Europe on the same kind of level playing field that other countries do. And I think they do get that out of this. It's not the strongest agreement that we could have gotten. I think the question, though, becomes what do you think the alternative could have been? There was no movement on those issues. the idea that Iran will be a nuclear threshold state in 15 years, I think, is better than the prospect of a nuclear Iran with a bomb within that 15-year window. There's no question that that's to our advantage. I mean, I think there was lots of room for improvement. There's no question, as you pointed out. There were specific things the president said he wanted out of this, and he doesn't get all the way there on any of them. But I think this was a question of, can we get anything done to push this off the brink where it has been, where there's this threat of some sort of military involvement either on Israel's part or from the Iranians.
All right, so if Congress does not go for this, where does this leave us?
Well, that's really unclear of how much power Congress actually has to stop this. And I think there's some question whether Congress will go for it or not. But you mentioned that, Iran sought legitimacy, and I think that's the most dangerous thing this agreement did. It not only gave it legitimacy, it pretty much established it as the power in the region. This is a rogue state that funds terrorism, still holding our hostages. We walked away, gave Iran an agreement that's going to provide it $150 billion in sanctions relief, probably by the end of the year, and we couldn't even get 4 American hostages released in exchange. It's going to trigger an arms war in the Middle East. The Saudis have already said what Iran gets, we want, and that Turkey's not going to sit there and say, not us too. So in 15 years, and that's no time, particularly in the Middle East, in 15 years, you're going to have a lot of nuke-toting rogue states or dangerous states in that region. We've made the world a much more dangerous state. But I will agree with one thing. It was the best deal this president could get, because I don't think the Iranians took him seriously from the beginning. They looked at his history of ignoring and erasing red lines, of backing down from his threats and his statements, and they had his number.
But
Last word on this,
the
Stephen.
threat of nuclear Iran predates this president, and George Bush got nothing. So we are in a better space today than we were when he left office, and I think that's the point. The other point here is that this is a move to try to sort of diplomatically change the state of Iran from within. Releasing the sanctions. I mean, you've got a very middle-class aspiring young generation of Iranians who want something really different from what they have. This gives them the opportunity to get that and change the regime that's in charge so that in 15 years, maybe it's not a state that is even aspiring to nuclear power.
4 years ago, when those young folks were out in the streets, we should have supported regime change.
Probably.
At that time.
All right. Turning now to Detroit, famous street artist Shepard Fairey was arraigned this week on felony charges of malicious destruction of property. He turned himself in after police issued an arrest warrant for illegally tagging buildings in Detroit. The LA-based artist was actually hired to paint a huge mural on the One Campus Martius building, but it was his extracurricular work that landed him in hot water. It seems the city really wants to send a message that Detroit is not an open canvas. But again, I mean, you bring in a famous graffiti artist, and then who says, hey, and by the way, while I'm in Detroit, I'm probably going to tag some buildings. So the surprise of what he did is really not there. Is the surprise in the severity of the charge now?
This guy's got to be loving this. Whatever fine he pays coming out is going to be more than reaped in return in terms of marketing and infamy, which is what these folks live on. I can't imagine he's going to jail. I think he's probably going to pay.
Should he?
I don't know. I think there's no message you're going to be able to send this guy that's severe enough to get him to change his ways. My worry is not him, because he just passed through here and he's gone. It's that the inspiration he provides to everybody else with a spray can who paints this garish crap on the sides of Detroit buildings and windows in a place where people...
That's a technical art term, by the way. That's a technical art term.
And of course, every one of them thinks they're an artist. But, in a town where people are trying to clean up, trying to give the appearance that this is a place we care about, and it's not, a place where you can just come in and treat it as your playground.
Nice. So, do you think this is overzealous prosecution, or?
Well, I mean, he broke the law, and there's got to be some adjudication of that to some degree. And I think when somebody this high profile does something against the law, it sends the wrong message if you don't do anything.
Right.
Should he go to jail? Of course not. He should probably
should have to clean
it up, right? Clean it up, and although
that would be a good punishment, send him out there with a scrub brush.
Right, get it off of there.
That'd be a great video opportunity. Yeah.
I will say that the stuff that he tagged is actually really interesting. I mean, he's a very interesting artist.
It's interesting, but would you feel the same way if it was on the side of your house?
I might. I mean, doesn't that increase the value that you have a shepherd fairy on the side of your house, right? You can come tag my place.
It's art if the building belongs to you or you have permission. It's vandalism if it doesn't.
All right. Okay. Well, and finally tonight, a new segment. Are you guys excited? Should we put a drum roll on for this one?
Do we have like graphics?
No, we don't.
Did you know about this?
No, I didn't pass this new segment through you. It's a new segment that looks
it's best to do it
at the
that way.
people not listening to you who are having a good week thanks to news that impacted them. All right. So Nolan, Steve, and I have 3 examples for you, and so we're going to take them one at a time.
Best
First,
week.
It's a good week for ... Wayne County Executive Warren Evans, who submitted a balanced budget that contains no trickery and makes department heads happy. It's a good week for Warren Evans, huh? What do you think? He's at least saying it digs them out of the hole, and he's making things work. I love the fact that it was like there's no trickery in this budget.
I think he's been sleeping with Brooks Patterson.
I don't even know how to respond to that. I don't even know what that means.
It never happens in Wayne County. There's some influence somewhere.
He's taking it seriously. This is what he said he was going to do when he ran.
Good.
All right, and so the sheriff's department, even though they get a cut, they're still kind of happy with it. And the prosecutor's department, they got a $4 million cut, but they're still happy with it.
I think that is a significant difference. The relationship that Warren has with Kim Worthy and with Benny Napoleon is really different than the relationship that Bob Ficano had with them. And he's not doing anything different than what Bob proposed doing. I think it's the way that he's done it and included them in the decision-making process that has them a little happier.
And we're still waiting for the state to weigh in on whether or not there's an actual financial emergency in
Yeah, I think that's just a matter of steps. I mean, I think everybody agrees there is, and there's going to be action.
All right, you ready for my next? It's a good week for? This is so exciting. All right, it is a good week for Michigan prisoners who hopefully will not have any more maggots in their food now that the Aramark food contract has been canceled. So after a lot of complaining, a lot of in-depth reports, this contract has finally been canceled by the state, and now they have a new Trinity's going to be taking over, and it's going to cost a little bit more, which I think is interesting as well.
Well, I mean, you have to, you expect your contractors, your service providers to do their job. I mean, it's not okay to serve prisoners bad food, I mean, just because they're in prison.
There needs to be better performance management of this. I mean, the whole idea of privatization is okay, but you got to make sure that you're getting what you pay for. And with our Aramark, we were not, and the state was not quite quick enough responding to that. There should be a better sort of infrastructure for saying, here are your goals, no maggots. Let's start with that. And if you don't meet them, we got to take the contract from
Yeah, but it wasn't even just no maggots. I mean, you're talking about a lot of employees who were bad behavior with prisoners, and the last straw was smuggling in tobacco or smuggling in drugs. You're having sexual relations in the cooler.
Again,
I mean,
yeah, but that's not isolated to the contractors. I mean, that's been going on.
But a performance management contract, which is what you ought to have with these private providers, would again catch that stuff and have consequences meted out quicker, and that's what they're not doing.
Does the change of this contract at all bring about any thought that we're going to see any more kind of prison reform or reforms on a larger level of our prison system here in Michigan, or is this just this is an isolated incident?
I'm not sure it's operating reforms that we need. I know the governor is well underway in a sentencing reform and a whole criminal justice system reform to try to reduce that prison population, and that's the best way to reduce cost. If you don't lock so many people up, if you find alternative means of punishment for the people who aren't a physical or property threat to society, and reduce that population by 25%, that's a significant amount of money available for other priorities.
Right.
All right, how much time we have left? Do we have any time left? We got 1 minute left. All right, so we're going to do my last one. It's a good week for fireworks haters because efforts are picking up steam to repeal Michigan's fireworks law.
Good.
So what do we think about that?
Good. Get rid of it.
Not soon enough.
I mean, it's like a war zone out there all night long. Boom, boom, boom.
Smoke and
for weeks around the
fire
4th.
and
People are getting their little
loud.
fingers blown off. Kids coming into emergency rooms, burn
It's
up.
dangerous, and it's
idiotic.
you talk about public nuisance.
Yeah.
It goes on for days and days and days after the 4th, and local mayors feel hamstrung because of the state law. They can't even.
I bet those people are flying the Confederate flag.
They
Oh,
probably are.
gosh.
That's
All right,
right.
seriously.
Fireworks and the
Now I'm going to
flag.
end the show. See, I'm going to have to end the show. I'm not going to let either one of you say another word. All right, and that is going to do it for My Week. We have a lot to talk about, so we're going to take our headline segment online tonight. So go to myweek.org right now, and you'll see our take on some of the biggest national headlines this week, and there were a lot of them. You can also find us on Facebook and on Twitter. We'd love to connect with you there. I'm Christy McDonald. Have a great night. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Recently, Michigan's economy has begun to turn around. Michigan's gained over 250,000 new jobs. We've paid off $20 billion in long-term debt. And our population is increasing for the first time in a decade. But to make Michigan a top 10 state, there's still plenty of work to be done. Step up and help put Michigan on top. Learn what you can do at MichiganTurnaroundPlan.com.
Funding is also provided by Delta.